For centuries, the golden sarcophagus remained hidden beneath layers of earth, dust, and silence, as if time itself had been instructed to preserve it untouched. It was not merely a tomb lost among forgotten ruins. There was something about its presence that seemed to resist human gaze, as if an invisible force whispered warnings with every step toward its discovery. Those who approached reported strange sensations, a heaviness in the air, a restlessness that could not be explained by reason. The golden metal, though hidden, reflected an energy that pierced the veil of centuries, awakening in the most skeptical hearts a sense of reverence and awe. Ancient legends held a tomb guarded by divine forces, inaccessible to those approaching with impure intentions. In neighboring villages, stories were passed down from generation to generation of travelers who disappeared while trying to explore the region, and of treasure hunters who fell mysteriously ill after hearing rumors of a golden glow hidden beneath the sands. There were no official records, only fragments of accounts, but enough to make the more discerning avoid the area, convinced that there lay something beyond the ordinary world of man. And yet, time could not erase the sarcophagus's silent call. Civilizations rose and fell, empires rose and fell, but that tomb, invisible to the world, remained, holding within it a secret that defied both science and faith. Its very existence seemed to defy logic, for nothing built by man should withstand the passing of millennia so flawlessly. It was as if an invisible barrier had protected it from earthquakes, floods, and the inevitable effects of natural degradation. When it was finally found, there was no immediate celebration. The silence of the place seemed to command respect, as if every grain of sand and stone around it bore witness to something too sacred to be disturbed. The first archaeologists to find it hesitated, unable to touch the golden surface that gleamed even in the dim light. The sight was at once beautiful and disturbing. A solid gold sarcophagus, adorned with enigmatic symbols, covered in inscriptions that corresponded to no clearly understood language. In that instant, everyone understood that this was not just another archaeological artifact. It was not just buried treasure awaiting looters or curious scholars. The sarcophagus seemed to breathe on its own, radiating a presence that forced even the most skeptical to retreat. It was as if every glance cast upon it was also watched in return, as if a hidden intelligence lay behind that golden glow, patiently guarding its message. The mystery lay not only in the gold lining the tomb, but in the silence that enveloped it, a heavy silence that conveyed to everyone the feeling that the discovery had not been an accident. It was as if the sarcophagus had waited, protected by invisible forces, until the right moment arrived to reveal what it held. The discovery of the sarcophagus did not happen by chance, nor was it the result of a planned search. What seemed like just another routine excavation in a region marked by ancient ruins soon turned into something that would change the lives of those involved forever. Archaeologists arrived at the site after reports from peasants who, while working the land, found unusual stones arranged in unnatural formations. At first, it was believed to be merely fragments of an ancient temple mentioned in forgotten texts, but as the excavations progressed, deeper clues began to emerge. With each layer of sand removed, something in the environment changed. The air grew denser, instruments failed, and even the most experienced team members reported a strange sense of surveillance. The terrain seemed to resist exploration, as if unwilling to be violated. However, human persistence overcame the Earth's resistance, and soon an underground structure of monumental proportions began to reveal itself. It was as if a secret corridor, shaped by skilled hands and guided by knowledge beyond human reach, was leading everyone to an inevitable destination. As torches first illuminated the walls, engravings and symbols appeared in a language unlike anything officially recorded. Some resembled Egyptian inscriptions, others had Mesopotamian undertones, but nothing fit into a logical chronology. Experts were astonished. How could symbols from such distinct cultures coexist in the same tomb? The only possible explanation was the most perplexing. This structure had been built by a civilization that predated all others, or perhaps by a people who had connected to several worlds simultaneously. And it was at the end of this corridor, amidst absolute silence, that the archaeologists encountered the unexpected. A vast, intact chamber opened before them. In the center lay the golden sarcophagus. There was no evidence of looters, no marks of rape. The tomb was so well preserved that it appeared to have been sealed only a few years earlier, not thousands of centuries. The golden surface reflected the light from the lanterns with an almost supernatural intensity, casting reflections that brought the surrounding symbols to life. The group remained silent for long minutes, unable to explain what they saw. It wasn't just the beauty of the artifact that left them speechless, but the feeling that they had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. It was as if every step they took up to this point had been foreseen, as if they were fulfilling a role written long before their own existences. Some felt fear, others reverence, but all understood, deep down, that this moment marked more than just an archaeological discovery. It was the beginning of something much greater. Science had found an impossible treasure, but what lay before them was not just gold. It was a portal to the unknown, an enigma that held, behind its beauty and grandeur, a message that would only be revealed to those willing to face the weight of the divine. The first visual contact with the golden sarcophagus was enough to transform the entire atmosphere within the chamber. The air seemed heavier, as if an invisible presence filled every space, watching the intruders who dared to cross the boundaries imposed by time and silence. It was not just an archaeological object gleaming in the lantern light. There was something alive on its surface, something emanating an ancient, unnameable force. The archaeologists, accustomed to handling impressive discoveries, immediately realized that this was no ordinary piece. As they approached, symbols engraved on the walls and on the sarcophagus itself began to come to life with clarity. It was as if they glowed subtly, pulsing in intervals reminiscent of slow, steady breathing. There was no plausible scientific explanation for this. Some attributed it to the reflection of light on the golden walls, but no reflection should move in rhythmic patterns. Others preferred to remain silent, unable to face the obvious. There was an energy there, latent, as if invisible forces were protecting this sacred place. Later reports from the team revealed even more disturbing details. One of the archaeologists claimed to have felt a kind of electric shock when he extended his hand near the surface of the sarcophagus, even without touching it. Another, overcome by a sudden malaise, swore he heard an incomprehensible whisper echoing within the chamber. Some said the symbols not only glowed but changed shape when viewed from different angles, as if concealing messages that could only be understood by those ready to receive them. The most skeptical tried to explain the phenomena as the result of exhaustion, the confined environment, or excessive expectations in the face of such a grand discovery. However, the more they tried to rationalize, the stronger the signs became that they were facing something beyond human logic. It was as if the tomb itself rejected banal explanations, imposing itself as a mystery beyond comprehension. Local legends were soon remembered. Ancient residents of the region often told stories of a cursed tomb, protected by gods who would punish anyone who attempted to violate it. Many laughed these stories off as mere folklore, but in that moment, before the sarcophagus, no one dared to scoff. It was impossible to deny the sensation of being inside a consecrated space where time had no power and where greater forces were present. A reverent silence fell over the group. It wasn't an ordinary silence, but a dense, heavy one, as if even the air had been instructed to remain still. Every breath felt like sacrilege, every movement a desecration. The golden sarcophagus, with its otherworldly aura, didn't just hold mortal remains. It held secrets, messages, perhaps even truths, capable of transforming the very notion of humanity. It was clear that any attempt to touch it without understanding its true purpose could have unpredictable consequences. What lay there was not just history. It was the boundary between the human and the divine world. The days following the discovery of the sarcophagus were marked by a disturbing pattern. Nothing seemed to happen naturally inside the chamber. Equipment that worked perfectly on the outside would fail as soon as it was brought closer to the tomb. Lanterns would go out without explanation, cameras would freeze, and even compasses seemed to lose their bearings in the face of that golden presence. It was as if an invisible, untouchable barrier had been erected there with the clear purpose of keeping out any intruders. The archaeologists, initially skeptical, began to notice that all the incidents followed a similar pattern. The closer someone tried to get, the more intense the effects became. One of the technicians, determined to photograph the symbols in detail, brought his camera to within inches of the sarcophagus's surface. Moments later, the equipment burned in his hands, smoking as the group watched in disbelief. Another, while trying to decipher the inscriptions using paper and charcoal, suffered such intense dizziness that he had to be evacuated immediately, swearing he felt a cold hand grip his wrist. These episodes soon fueled the feeling that they were not facing physical protection, but rather spiritual guardianship. The sarcophagus seemed surrounded by an invisible wall, a barrier erected not by men, but by forces that defied all scientific logic. Many recalled the stories passed down by local residents. They spoke of ancestral spirits assigned to watch over what had been sealed, of guardians who did not belong to the world of the living. Perhaps they were just legends, but there, faced with so many signs, it was hard not to believe that something greater was at work. The environment surrounding the tomb also revealed strange signs. The temperature inside the chamber varied abruptly. One moment, the air was stiflingly hot. The next, an icy current coursed through the space, making the skin crawl as if someone had just passed invisibly between them. Even sounds seemed to follow a different order. Footsteps echoed louder than they should have, and low voices took on metallic tones, as if being reproduced by another mouth. Despite the growing fear, there was also an irresistible allure. Everyone knew they were facing something unique, a secret that had withstood millennia of invasions, wars, and destruction. But the sarcophagus remained untouched, protected by a force that could not be measured or analyzed. Some began to question whether it was possible, or even permissible, to breach that barrier. Others, driven by ambition, saw it as a challenge to be overcome, even at the cost of their own lives. Deep down, the feeling was clear that gold did not belong to the world of men. The sarcophagus was not just a funerary object adorned with ancient symbols, but an altar guarded by invisible entities, a portal that would only open at the right time and to those destined to understand its message. It was as if the divine forces present there reminded intruders that some truths cannot be extracted by force. They can only be revealed when the time is right. To understand the magnitude of the golden sarcophagus, it was necessary to look beyond the sands of the present and delve into the forgotten past, a time before recorded memory. The inscriptions covering the tomb did not correspond to a single culture, but to a mosaic of symbols that spanned borders and eras. There were features reminiscent of Egyptian hieroglyphics, markings similar to Norse runes, and figures reminiscent of Mesoamerican civilizations. How could cultures so distant, separated by millennia, leave traces on the same artifact? The only plausible answer was the most disturbing: that sarcophagus was not the work of an isolated people, but the legacy of a primordial civilization, forgotten by official history. Some scholars have suggested that it might have belonged to a people predating all others we know, a culture that served as a matrix for later traditions. Others dared to go further, claiming that the tomb could have been built under the guidance of forces outside of Earth, entities that transmitted sacred knowledge to the first humans. The fact is, nothing in the sarcophagus followed the pattern of known tombs. There were no records of kings, no genealogies, no symbols of material power. Everything there pointed to something greater, something more related to the cosmos than to politics or earthly life. Ancient legends reinforced this view. Peoples of the region spoke of a priest king who ruled not only over men, but also over the elements of nature. They said he received direct messages from the gods, and that at the end of his journey, he did not die like mortals, but crossed the threshold between worlds, leaving his body protected by invisible forces. This narrative echoed in different traditions, with different names, but always with the same core: a being of superior knowledge, guarded by a golden tomb, whose opening would only be permitted when humanity was ready to hear his message again. Archaeologists, though reluctant to admit it, began to realize that the sarcophagus might be more than just a funerary object. It could be proof that, at some remote point in history, there was a lineage of spiritual masters who crossed cultures, leaving signs for future generations. The fact that so many universal symbols were engraved there seemed no coincidence. It was as if they all pointed to a common origin, a common heart of wisdom that humanity had lost. This realization carried with it an immense weight. If the sarcophagus truly held the memory of a forgotten civilization, its opening would mean not just an archaeological discovery, but the revelation of a legacy destined for all humanity. A legacy that could illuminate or destroy, depending on how it was received. And so, faced with the gold that reflected more than light, the group realized they were not just looking at an ancient treasure, but a broken link between past and present, waiting to be restored. The presence of the golden sarcophagus could no longer be ignored. For days, the team of archaeologists simply observed it, recording every detail and trying to decipher the symbols that covered its surface. But there was a growing tension in the air, the need to know what lay within. The silence that enveloped the tomb seemed increasingly unbearable, and the promise of a revelation became irresistible. It was then that the decision was made. The seal must be broken. The environment, however, reacted to the first bold move. As the tools were prepared and brought close to the golden lid, a sudden chill swept through the subterranean chamber. The air seemed to condense, making it difficult to breathe. Lanterns flickered, as if an invisible breeze had passed through the space. Still, the work began. Hammers, levers, and precision instruments were carefully positioned, but no movement seemed sufficient to dislodge the lid. The sarcophagus remained intact, as if the gold were harder than any known alloy. One of the team members, driven by ambition, insisted on applying more force. His blows echoed through the space with an almost metallic strangeness, as if the tomb were responding to the attack. The result was not opening, but a disturbing accident. The tool slipped from his hands, shattering as it fell to the ground. The stunned archaeologist claimed to have felt an invisible pressure on his chest, as if something were pushing him backward. His words, broken by fear, echoed in the silence. "He doesn't want us to touch him." Even in the face of these signs, the persistence persisted. New attempts were made, this time using more careful techniques. Small cuts were attempted on the edge of the sarcophagus, but in each case, the material proved impenetrable. It was as if the gold had been melted by divine hands, with properties beyond human comprehension. One of the scientists, observing the tiny cracks appearing in the steel instruments, murmured, "It's as if the tomb were turning its force against anyone who tries to open it." The atmosphere became increasingly unbearable. Strange noises echoed off the walls, like whispers that no one could identify. Some swore they heard voices in unknown languages, while others claimed to feel the floor vibrate slightly, as if the space itself were alive. The tension was so great that some refused to remain in the chamber, leaving only the most stubborn to face the enigma. At the height of the attempt, something unexpected happened. A tiny crack appeared in one corner of the lid, but instead of revealing the interior, it released a blast of icy air that swept through the entire room. The lanterns went out simultaneously, plunging everyone into absolute darkness. Screams echoed, footsteps blurred, and for a few moments, no one knew if the place was collapsing or if invisible forces had finally awakened. When the light was restored, the sarcophagus remained intact, as if nothing had been done. Only the feeling that they had crossed a forbidden boundary hung in the air. After the failed attempts to open the sarcophagus, the atmosphere inside the chamber changed almost palpably. No one dared approach the golden lid again, but everyone knew the mystery still pulsed there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. It was then that one of the archaeologists, an expert in ancient languages, decided to turn his attention to the symbols engraved on the surrounding walls. Until that moment, they had been seen as decorations or ritual inscriptions, but something about the way they reflected light after the recent events caught his attention. He realized that the symbols were not arranged randomly. By aligning the inscriptions according to a geometric pattern, a sequence began to reveal itself. It was as if the figures, viewed in isolation, were indecipherable, but united, they formed a secret narrative. The archaeologist, seized by a strange intuition, began to trace the invisible lines that connected each sign. Gradually, before the team's astonished eyes, a larger drawing emerged, a star map. These were no ordinary constellations, but an astronomical configuration that could only be observed at very specific times when the stars aligned in perfect harmony. And, to everyone's astonishment, the last time this alignment had occurred coincided exactly with the estimated time of the tomb's construction. Even more disturbing, the same alignment was about to occur again after thousands of years. This discovery completely changed the interpretation of the sarcophagus. It wasn't just a tomb. It was also a cosmic marker, a key that could only be activated when the sky repeated the same dance it had witnessed in the past. The tomb was somehow connected to the movement of the stars, as if the message stored there had been intended not for any generation, but for those living at the precise time of the reunion between heaven and earth. As the team debated in shock the meaning of the star map, something else happened. The symbols on the surface of the sarcophagus began to emit a soft glow, more intense than before, as if responding to the discovery. It was a subtle but vivid light that seemed to pulse in time with the human heart. Some of those present recoiled, overcome with fear. Others, fascinated, knelt before the tomb, convinced they were witnessing a divine manifestation. The archaeologist responsible for the translation could barely speak. Between rapid breaths, he merely murmured, "It's protected not only by the earth, but by the sky." In that instant, everyone understood that the sarcophagus was not meant to be breached by tools or brute force. It was a cosmic vault, guarded not only by invisible forces, but by the very order of the universe. The revelation changed everything. It was no longer a question of how to open the tomb, but rather of understanding when and for whom it was destined to open. The glow emanating from the symbols did not cease. On the contrary, it grew more intense, as if it had waited centuries for the correct perception to manifest itself. The archaeologists, in absolute silence, watched as the inscriptions seemed to rearrange themselves before their eyes. It was as if the lines engraved in the gold, previously immobile, were transformed into living lines, redrawing themselves in real time under the influence of an invisible force. What had been mere ornament was now revealed as writing. The trembling expert in ancient languages approached again. His voice faltered as he tried to translate what appeared before him. Disjointed words began to make sense. Watch, guard, wait. Soon, entire sentences formed. Here rests not just a body, but the pact between gods and men. The gold holds not bones, but an eternal testimony. The room froze at those words. The tomb had not been built merely to protect mortal remains, but to preserve a message destined for the future. As the translation progressed, the content became increasingly disturbing. The text spoke of a previous humanity, which had received divine knowledge directly from those who walked among the stars. This humanity, however, had failed, corrupting the original message and precipitating its own downfall. The golden sarcophagus, then, was created as both a warning and a promise. When the stars aligned again, the message would resurface to remind humanity that the fate of civilization has always been in the hands of its choices. The symbols further described that whoever dared to decipher the message must be prepared, for they would find not only history, but also a mirror, the revelation that the mistakes of the past could be repeating themselves in the present. It was a clear warning, but also an opportunity. Humanity would have before it the chance to break the cycle or condemn itself again. The entire team felt the weight of those words. No gold or jewel could compare to it. Ancient knowledge, hidden for millennia, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. Some archaeologists wept silently, as if recognizing deep down the truth behind those words. Others remained motionless, unable to accept that before them was not just an archaeological discovery, but a spiritual revelation. The archaeologist translating took a deep breath before uttering the last words he could decipher. When heaven and earth meet again, the seal will be opened, and destiny will be revealed to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Those words weren't just a warning, they were a prophecy. The sarcophagus then fell silent again. The glow ceased. The inscriptions returned to their golden stillness, as if they had closed themselves off until the next moment of stellar alignment. But the message had already been recorded, imprinted not only on paper and cameras, but in the consciousness of all present. The gold held more than just a body. It held the memory of a lost alliance, and the reminder that humanity was never alone on its journey. When the first reports of the message began to be recorded, the team realized they could not keep a revelation of such magnitude silent. However, at the same time, the awareness of the weight they carried left them divided. What they had witnessed was not just an archaeological discovery. It was a bridge between past and future, living proof that a wisdom existed far beyond what modern humanity had dared to imagine. The repercussions were immediate. Within the team itself, beliefs clashed. Some saw a divine sign, others feared the implications for science. Some researchers insisted that the message should be released to the world without delay, as it represented the greatest discovery in human history. Others argued that it might not be safe. The prophecy warned of mistakes that could be repeated, and revealing it in an unstable society could generate panic, manipulation, or even wars over the sarcophagus's meaning. The tension between reason and faith, between prudence and boldness, gripped the group. In the outside world, when rumors began to leak, they quickly spread like wildfire. Headlines spoke of an impossible treasure, an indestructible tomb, an ancient secret guarded by unseen forces. Skeptical scientists tried to deny the reports, claiming they were fanciful interpretations of ancient inscriptions. But the few visual records that did emerge, showing luminous symbols and descriptions of the star map, were enough for many to begin to believe. The sarcophagus ceased to be merely an archaeological discovery and became a watershed between those who still trusted only science and those who saw it as confirmation of something sacred. Religious institutions also reacted. Some condemned the discovery as fraud or heresy, fearing that the words engraved in the gold would shake ancient dogmas. Others, on the contrary, interpreted the message as confirmation of ancient scriptures, seeing in the pact between gods and men the same alliance described in their traditions. Suddenly, a silent artifact buried for millennia was reshaping discourses, beliefs, and even the politics of nations. The scientific community, under pressure, organized emergency meetings to discuss the implications. The big question was, how could symbols from such distinct cultures be united in a single object? And even more so, how could one explain the phenomenon of light that seemed to follow a cosmic pattern? For some, it was an insoluble enigma. For others, proof that science was still in its infancy, facing greater mysteries. But perhaps the greatest impact was not in newspapers or academia, but within each person who learned of the revelation. For many, it lit a flame of hope. If a previous civilization had received divine teachings, then perhaps humanity today also had the chance to begin anew. For others, it was an unbearable weight, a reminder that history is cyclical and that ancient mistakes may be about to be repeated. The golden sarcophagus, protected by invisible forces, had finally fulfilled part of its mission, to divide, awaken, and challenge humanity to face its own reflection. The golden sarcophagus remained untouched, closed as it had always been, but it was no longer the same in the eyes of humanity. It didn't matter that its lid hadn't given way, nor that its contents remained hidden. What had been revealed by the inscriptions had already transcended the barriers of time. That message, guarded for millennia, now pulsed in the present as an uncomfortable and fascinating reminder. Humanity's fate has always been in its own hands, and heaven still watches every step. For the archaeologists, the experience would never be forgotten. Many turned away from academic life, unable to return to the cold explanations of science after witnessing the inexplicable. Others, on the contrary, became obsessed, dedicating years to studying every trace, every symbol, trying to fully unravel the pact described in the gold. But the truth is that none of them left the same way they entered. There was an invisible mark on all of them, as if the tomb had imprinted on their souls the responsibility of carrying that secret. Meanwhile, humanity, divided, reflected on the prophecy. Some saw in the message a clear warning that we were repeating the same mistakes of past civilizations: greed, pride, and the destruction of natural balance. Others preferred to see hope, believing that perhaps we were facing a wake-up call, a call to reconnect with the divine. But regardless of the interpretation, no one could ignore the power of that revelation. It was impossible not to feel that somehow the sarcophagus was waiting, and this was perhaps the greatest lesson. Gold didn't just protect a body or an ancient inheritance. It protected the right time. It protected the moment when heaven and earth would meet again in the same alignment, bringing to light not only secrets of the past, but choices for the future. The seal was not meant to be broken by impatient hands, but to be opened when humanity was mature enough to bear the truth it held. Today, the sarcophagus still rests in silence, surrounded by cameras, guards, and endless debate. But some say its energy remains active, pulsing more intensely as the next alignment of the stars approaches. Perhaps it's just superstition. Perhaps it's real. The fact is that everyone who approaches it, even without touching it, feels the same chill, as if being watched by something that transcends human limits. And so, the question remains, what will happen when heaven and earth align again? Will the seal open before us, revealing the truth that has spanned millennia? Or will it remain closed, awaiting another era, another people, perhaps wiser than us? No one can answer. But one thing is certain. The golden sarcophagus is not just a tomb. It is a mirror, a reflection of who we were, who we are, and who we can choose to become.